Hi! Have you ever wanted to make your own Raspberry Pi hat? I have 2 additional sensors and some light that I need to attach to a Raspberry Pi for my Piwars robot. So to do that, I'm going to make my own hat, and I'm going to bodge it together with some mod wire, bit of soldering and some time in Fritzing. This is Fritzing, and Fritzing is the tool I've been using to create these boards in, and maybe I'll talk you through what we've got here. So at the bottom I have a big header for the Pi, and then it looks like just a mass of wires, and it mostly is. So the 2 sides are going to be distance sensors, and the top here goes to a Neopixel light strip. So the blue and the grey wire are your clock and data lines. Then there's the ground wires, which I've painted black everywhere, paint it black. And then you've got the positive across the top, which is all red. The trigger lines are these green wires, which come straight out of a couple of the GPIO pins on the Pi. But the echo lines, which are a return, go across these resistors. So there's a 1K and a 2K, forming a voltage divider. And what I've done is I kind of placed these near to each other, so when it comes to soldering it, I'm going to bend the leads over, because I'm just using perfboard, and then tack them onto the bottom of things. So then here I kind of end up with a little cluster of solder joints and around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to print this as is, because Fritzing actually has 1-to-1 really good scaling, so you can print it straight out. I'm then going to stick it to the board. I'm going to put pins through all of the holes, and I'm going to solder it straight onto that piece of paper as a template. Let's go. And I've printed it out on my print. So I've actually punched holes on this piece of paper so I can use it as a template. So I'm going to start by soldering 2 more distance sensors on the header here. I'm then going to pin this on with, say, 1 or 2 of the other connections. And I'm going to start making point-to-point connections with the soldering iron. So I've now soldered on the header, and I'm going to find a way to pin the template on and solder the rest in through the template. And this is the perfect time for me to use this, the Octosnap, so I can make myself the 4-pin headers that I'm going to need for these others. I think I'm going to make those headers male, so I can do female to female plugs to all the sensors. And just in case you thought I had magic secret sauce, people don't, although this looks kind of nice, I've just realised that some of those wires that I've got mapped out there need to connect on top of the connector that I've got covered by this paper. Don't know how I'm going to do that, because I'm imagining if I try and solder on there I'm going to get very burny paper. Okay, well let's solder in these, and if worst case is I slice the bottom off. I was able to find my wire wrapping wire, the tiny 28 AWG. So some of the wire connections I've got to make directly onto here, and some have got to get pushed through there. I'm going to try to see what happens if I make one above the paper. Let's hope I don't set fire to anything. So I've still not got the hang of dealing with these tiny wire wrapping wires and getting them to stay on things. So I've just used blue tack to stop it kind of flying away. And I'm going to try and solder it on that way. Okay, so how well did this work? Well, there's a nice big burn mark on the paper and some smudgy blue insulation. The wire does go through the paper holes really nicely. Now, I gave up on trying to get 2 wires on this point, so I've sent that wire around to that point instead so I can join these 4 points underneath. But now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more points to make actually on the Pi wiring, and I'm hoping the other ones go better than this one did. It was a bit of an experiment. I ended up actually having to get it somehow, and this was tricky, to wrap round once before it would stay on and solder. So maybe if I do that, so next time it's going to be easier, that would be good. And I had to strip it first, whereas these ones, I might just put them through unstripped and see if I can just basically melt the solder, melt the insulation off. We'll see. I've made the first of the connections from this point across to this point, where I have just burned straight through the insulation. I've tested it with a multimeter and I'm happy. So now I'm starting to form other wire parts, and I'm making them about the length of the wire, but I'm putting a very long leader on each of the bottom, so I'm forming them so I'll push it through. I can then actually burn off a bit of the insulation, but more to the point, I've got a bit of length at the bottom, to then go and point wire them across to one of the other areas. At this point I've placed and I've soldered, at least so they're held in place, all of the wires. I've not made all the connections on the back, so the wires aren't necessarily going where they're supposed to be going to, and I've not made the connections on that header. I'm leaving the resistors till the very end, although I'll make those before I start cross-connecting along the bottom. I'm actually into day 2. I've made most of the connections, including those across to the top here. And then I need to next add the resistors, and then I can make all the connections on the bottom. I found using tweezers, as in first stripping the wire with some better strippers, these things, and then using these tweezers to wrap them around the posts, did make it far easier to solder if I was able to do it. It was very, very, very fiddly to do. I actually went to work between sessions on this, and I had time to think about it, and I've realised I have made a glaring mistake. The top line here is power, and the bottom here is ground. I've got power and ground going the same way on this connector, and power and ground going that way on the other connector. But then, because I mirrored things from one side to the other, I thought, well, I need to invert the 2 signal pins. So I did, without inverting the power pins. So actually, the signal pins should be the same way up, and therefore I just kind of twist the cable if I need to turn it around the other way. So I need to swap either this side or this side and swap the 2 signal pins and put the resistor in another location. Now, I've already got this printed template, so it's a bit too late to change that. I might update my thing in Fritzing, because eventually this will have to be a PCB, but there's no time for a PCB now. So I'm going to check which way the sensor should really be, and then I'm going to swap those cables. So here's the sensor, and we're going to have it this way up because the voltage is across the top. So we've got trig, echo and ground. So this one is the right way up, this one is the wrong way up, so I'm going to have to go and invert this side. Okay, swapping those cables wasn't nearly as hard as I'd expected. You can see that resistors on a funny angle. I've now added in all 4 resistors, so I guess the next bit is to make connections on the back, test it all out, and then, well, I think it's my next video, I'll be trying this thing out on the real robot. Okay, so the technique I'm using for this bit is I am folding over some of the wires and then soldering together, and then using cutters, side cutters, to cut them off so they're flush with the other wire. So I'm just going to work through all of these, and then I should have all the connections done. So to fit my new boards, I was going on a full-on rewire, and my plan was to take the wide input shim and then mount it onto the mini Blackhat hacker, because then I could free it up and not have this horrible bit where it's kind of you know, squashed into the board. However, looks like the universe has other plans, because tonight is the night, and it's rather apt, given what's happening with Maplin at the moment, that my Maplin 50-watt soldering iron doesn't get hot at all. It's barely capable of melting butter, even at maximum setting. I guess I've given it a bit of an ordeal in the last couple of days. I mean, the light goes on, but nobody is home. Can't get any heat out of it at all. So I guess whatever plans I was going to go with tonight, I'm going to have to try and figure out some plans that don't involve more soldering. I'm into the next stage after having tested the custom hat that I made, and I've fitted it with the PiConZero that came off of the robot onto the mini Blackhat hacker. And so this assembly is going to go in the bottom section of the robot. Hopefully there's enough clearance for all the cables, but I can put larger supports on here. So then I can wire these across to sensors, I can wire that to the last sensor, and these across to motors and power. The only thing I'm slightly worried about is how am I going to get this cable through the Initio chassis up to the Pi. Now this cable looks like it's a bit of a short one, so I might have to use one of those IDE cables. Hopefully they've got all the holes populated. And maybe I'm going to need to knock something out of the bottom of this chassis to get to it. If the cables are a bit short, the other thing I could do is actually attach this assembly upside down to the bottom of this chassis, because there's plenty of places to bolt it on, which would give the cable less places to have to go to. The third alternative is to actually bring the whole Raspberry Pi down to here, so then the cable's only got to maybe go across from here to here or something, but then I'm not quite sure where we go with this. This, by the way, is the turret drive motor, which for Piwars this year it's going to be disabled because I need to find some way to have a limit on it, otherwise it'll cut its own cables off. Once I have limits on it, then I'll actually put it in properly, and it'll be really good for turret shooting events. Right, I'm going to crack on and figure out how to fit all of this back onto the robot.